It's 7 o'clock. Welcome everybody to our traditional Thursday Zoom session. It's really good to see you. So far we are approaching 200 people rapidly, and I will be closing the doors in about 5 or 10 minutes. So it's really good that you've come on time. I won't be talking very much today. I'll just pass the microphone to Paul, who will introduce our speaker. I'll just say that it's a really special event today because Chris is a fantastic speaker, and towards the end of the presentation, I will tell you about the course Chris will be running for us in the autumn. But now, Paul, if you're ready, go ahead and introduce Chris.
Hi folks, and welcome here this evening. In some ways, I don't actually think that Dr. Chris Irons needs a great deal of introduction. He is one of the major creators and developers and promoters of compassion-focused therapy. He is the author of an increasing number of books in the field, including a new one that's recently come out. I'm sure that you are all going to be poring over Amazon once this is actually finished today to look at what he's actually got to offer. And he is an inspiring speaker. I think from a personal point of view, what I think is probably for me most impressive about him is his ability to combine good theoretical knowledge with practical application. And I think that that's a relatively rare skill to have. And it's over to you, Chris, really, and thanks very much for being here.
Thank you, Paul. That's wonderful. Thank you for that lovely introduction. That's quite a thing to try to live up to now. So I hope I do it justice for everyone. Welcome, everyone. It's lovely to be here. A real honor to be here. I do apologize now and again if you hear a sort of screaming coming. It's my son Idris is mid his bath. And sometimes that goes really well, and other times, as I'm sure many of you are aware, it doesn't go quite as smoothly as you want to. So if you do hear random noises in the background, or if suddenly a little person, he's only 22 months old, but if he just waddles in his nappy, then do forgive me. Look, it's wonderful to be here. Gosh, it's actually quite a difficult thing to think about what can I do to get across some of these ideas of CFT in a short amount of time, and whilst also leaving time for questions. Because am I right in thinking, Paul, that I leave about 20 minutes for questions? Yes. So I've got a task then to try to get across a few ideas about compassion-focused therapy. And the way that I thought I'd do this is to think about how we could apply it to ourselves. Now, that's partly because of the situation with COVID, of course. These wonderful lectures that Paul and Julia have put on here during these difficult times is very inspirational. But it also got me thinking, of course, that our day-to-day jobs as therapists are hard. So, of course, COVID adds multiple layers to this. But our day-to-day lives are hard. Working day in, day out, moving into connecting with, hearing about some of the worst things that can happen to human beings. Tuning into, listening, trying to support, trying to help. The difficulties in alleviating distress. It's a hard job to do as a therapist. And that's just our day-to-day work. Never mind about the other stuff that's going on in our lives. Our relationships, which of course can be up and down. If you've got a child, how that can pose all sorts of challenges. And of course, just general things that can happen to us. Health concerns, worries, financial worries, and so on. So what I'm actually going to be talking about is not so much specifically about COVID, but just generally, really, the reality that life is hard. And that as a therapist, of course, we meet lots of versions of that. And how can we then start to try to be and practice compassion to ourselves in a way that we would hope to be able to distill to our patients too. Now, in part, this is a link to a book that some of my colleagues and myself, so we published this a few years ago. And so this is, I'm not sure we'll send through some links afterwards, but this is CFT from the inside out, how we can get therapists to learn about the CFT model by applying all the different bits to themselves. Now, of course, I can only give you a little slice of this tonight, but hopefully this will be something that could be quite helpful for you. Now, before we get into, I'm going to introduce a metaphor for you that I hope sort of fits for some of our client work. But what I wanted just to touch on are two brief things. So one is the definition of compassion that we have in CFT. So this is a fairly well-established definition, and the formal definition is compassion is a sensitivity to the suffering of self and others with a commitment to relieve and prevent suffering returning. So it's a bit long-winded, but a sensitivity to the suffering of self and others with a commitment to relieve that suffering and prevent its return. Now, the key thing really tonight to hold on to here is that there are two major components of that definition. So we call them the two psychologies of compassion. So the first part of compassion is a type of engagement psychology. So that involves being able to notice, move towards, tolerate, and understand distress and suffering. So that could be in somebody else, or it could be in you. So the first bit then is engaging, noticing, tuning into suffering, rather than blocking it out, turning away, ignoring it in some way. Now, engaging in suffering isn't enough though, because what compassion also brings is action. So the second psychology of compassion is a type of wise action. What can we begin to do that wisely works with and could relieve suffering in some ways? A way that we sometimes explain this is that if you've got a serious problem with your heart, of course, you're likely to be very anxious and very worried and concerned. And if you were to go and see a cardiologist in the hospital, it's likely, of course, that it'd be really lovely if that cardiologist is warm and friendly and empathetic and so on. But what would be really, really, really important for me, if it was my heart being the concern, is to know that that cardiologist had dedicated their lives to understanding hearts and that they had ideas about how to treat hearts. Being kind and nice and warm isn't enough. It's how you can take wise action. And it turns out it's the same thing for compassion here too. So it's not just about being nice and kind. Sometimes that is how you are compassionate, but it's how we take wise action, and we can learn how to do this. Now, the second thing about CFT, just to tell you briefly about, is that we talk about the three flows of compassion. And so this is very crucial to the CFT model, very particular to the CFT model actually. So the first flow is the one that mostly we're familiar with. So it's my compassion. So if I see you distressed, or my patient or my wife or whoever, it's me being compassionate to you, me trying to engage with your distress and relieve it in some way. A second type of flow of compassion is when we're distressed, can we be open to receiving and seeking out care and compassion from other people to us? Now, it turns out that in general, that's for many of our patients, but certainly for many clinicians, we're not so good at that flow. We're not so good at actually seeking out and receiving care and compassion from other people to us. We're much better giving, not necessarily so good at receiving. And then the final flow of compassion is self-compassion. So can I basically have this motivation, notice my own distress, and engage in wise action, ways to alleviate it? So of course, tonight we're going to be focusing on this third one, thinking about the type of self-compassion really. And the way that I wanted to try to link this in for you is in a metaphor. And it's a metaphor that I've been thinking about and talking about and writing about a bit for a while. And that's how we could maybe benefit as therapists by looking outwards and looking to the wisdom in a way of sportswomen and sportsmen. So bear with me for a moment as I work through this. So let's take for a moment Serena Williams playing Wimbledon final. Now, probably, I think we could all guess that it's highly unlikely that, let's say that the final starts at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, that Serena Williams is at her hotel, 12:30, looks at her phone, suddenly realizes it's only half an hour to get to Wimbledon. So she gets in a taxi with all her stuff. She's getting changed in the taxi. She goes along. She gets to Wimbledon, runs through all the crowds, gets her racket out, and immediately goes onto the court and starts sprinting around, running around into the full throes of the match. Because of course, what sportswomen and sportsmen do before they do their action, their skills, before they have to go to work, so to speak, is that they warm up. They take time to prepare their body and mind for the event that's about to come. Now, one intriguing bit for me is, I'm not sure how many of us as therapists take that same idea on for us. I'm not sure how many of us have been taught during our therapy training that actually this is something that we could benefit from, that maybe we could also learn to warm up and prepare our bodies and minds for what we're about to do in our jobs, which, let's be honest, is really difficult stuff sometimes. It's really painful material that we're going to go into. Now, sometimes people say, well, we have a bit of that stuff. Sometimes I've been taught to do this or that. But speaking to thousands and thousands and thousands of therapists over the years and going through various different therapy trainings myself, it's not something that's built into our training. In a way, we kind of turn up at work and we just get straight into it, a bit like Serena just getting straight into the match and sprinting around. Now, sometimes that might be okay. Maybe the people that you're working with that day are relatively grounded, they're not too distressed. Maybe your life has been okay. But here's the rub. A lot of the time we're working with people with severe distress. And then secondly, we also can come from a situation at home which has been very distressing too. People's health concerns, stresses at the house, not sleeping through the night for various reasons. So one of the bits then we can start off with, what would it be like if we could start off each day with a short amount of practice that might actually ground us and actually allow us to move into this caring mentality that CFT talks a lot about, engage in your soothing system, this parasympathetic vagus system, as Porges would touch on, that we also know is associated with opening up your prefrontal cortex, which is basically one of our superpowers as therapists, empathy, mentalizing, reflective function, all that kind of stuff. We can actually access that stuff ourselves through various exercises. These are exercises that we teach our clients in CFT, things to do with stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system, this caring motivation. Stuff I teach my clients to do for themselves, I can do for myself. And so one way that we can do this then, and in fact, I'm going to do a very brief version of this just here tonight with us, just for a couple of minutes, just settling ourselves and giving you a bit of a feel for what this might be like in this warming up like way. So if it's okay, what I would like you to do is just to get nice and comfortable in your chair, feet about shoulder width apart on the floor. And if it's okay, you're sitting nice and tall in your chair. So you've just got this nice sort of upright, confident posture. It's almost like you're just rolling your shoulders back slightly. So there's this sort of open, confident bit at the top of your chest. And just kind of keep your head in an alert position. And if it's okay to, I'm just going to ask you to close your eyes for a moment. So as you close your eyes, I'm just going to see if you can bring awareness into the here and now. So start off maybe by just noticing the contact points between your feet and the floor, between your body and the chair. And now just seeing if you can pay attention to your breathing. And just begin to notice and see if you can invite a soothing or calming breathing rhythm to your body. So we're looking to combine just a couple of things here. The first thing is an upright, confident body posture. It's a little bit like a tree with deep roots or like a mountain. It's a sense of just feeling grounded, strong and confident. But alongside this, a sense of slowing down in the body as you breathe out. Just as you're here, just maybe allowing your breathing rhythm just to slow down a little bit. See what it's like just to gently bring a friendly expression to your face. Almost as if you're thinking about somebody that you really care for. So here you are, upright, grounded body posture. Still with that sense of slowing down in your body and mind as you breathe out. Friendly facial expression. And then just for the final minute now, I'd like you just to see if you can bring to mind, almost to the front of your intention here, the front of your mind, the version of you that you would like to be as a therapist. So just think for a moment, what qualities would I like to have? What qualities would I really want to embody if I was really connected to my compassionate self? And if you can do, just get an outline of an image of this version of you. What your facial expression might be like, what your voice tone would sound like, what your intention would be towards your clients. And now we're just going to gently allow some of this focus just to fade from your mind, so you're becoming more aware of some of the sounds around you. Slowly opening your eyes and just taking a moment just to reorientate yourself to the here and now. Maybe if it's helpful, just take a moment just to stretch out slightly. So just finding a way just to bring yourself back into the room. So one of the things about doing a practice a little bit like this, and there's lots of different varieties that we can do with this, is about, first of all, settling the body. So we're grounding ourselves. We're using posture as a sort of supportive way. Many of you would have heard these things before. So like a mountain that can be in the presence of terrible weather, it still remains strong and grounded, or a tree with deep roots that, again, if it's a storm that comes, strong, grounded. And then, of course, we're settling our body. So that's parasympathetic, using the out-breath, slowing our breathing down. And then trying to set intention. How am I going to be? Let me just try to hold in mind the version of me, almost I'm going to bring to the forefront of my mind. So we can use these types of practices then to begin to do some of this work. In fact, a colleague of mine who I am supervising, she's a clinical psychology trainee. Her research project is looking at how some of these types of exercises and compassionate mind training could be helpful to reduce therapist burnout or clinician burnout. And we've got some really nice findings coming back from that by specifically trying to cultivate this type of awareness, this type of way of being with self, preparing ourselves and utilizing these exercises can be a very powerful way of reducing stress. But I want to go back for a moment before we turn out to some questions, because I want to do another practice with you, but it's building off the top or extending this metaphor, going back to Serena Williams. Because, of course, while Serena Williams will warm her body up before she takes action in the Wimbledon final, whether she wins or loses, she will also spend some time warming down. She will explicitly take some time to focus on warming her body down, stretching, maybe also, of course, speaking to her coach and just learning about what she would take from the final, whether she did well or not. What can I learn from this? What can I take from this? So here's another question for us as therapists. How often do we consciously warm down at the end of a long day seeing clients? When do we consciously try to bring a compassionate orientation back to ourselves, no matter how you've got on in the day, whether you've just aced it and you've just been the most amazing therapist that's ever been on this earth, or whether actually you're questioning yourself, how did I get through my training? How the hell am I here? Doesn't matter what type of day, can we meet ourselves as we would try to be supportive of other people? Now, there's loads of ways that you can do this. And I'm not suggesting that no therapist ever does this, but I think often what can happen is that in a way we finish our day of therapy and we're spat out back into our lives. So let's imagine that you've had a really shocking day. It's been really tough, really difficult clients, and you've been really struggling. The problem is, particularly working at home now, but it was like that anyway, is that I just go straight to my door, 1 staircase, 2 staircases down. I'm spat straight back into my life with my young child and my wife. And the problem is, what version of me am I taking back into my home life? Am I taking a caring, supportive husband or father? Is that the version I'm taking in? Or could you feeling like I can sometimes, that depending on the day, maybe actually I'm quite stirred up into anger, frustration, shame? And of course, if that's just one day or 1 week, I think probably my wife will be okay with that. I'm guessing my son will be okay with that. But imagine if it's like that month in, month out, that actually we are taking home this stuff. Do you think that might impact your relationships? Do you think it might affect how you get on with your partner, your family members? And so what we can do here then is explicitly make the decision consciously to try to ground ourselves and to bring something that's caring for us. Now, the one that I'm just going to do with you briefly here is an exercise that I started working with very long time ago, and a good friend and colleagues of mine did some research on, which is the idea of developing an image of an ideal compassionate supervisor. So an image of something that we can recruit specifically to be there for us as a way of just grounding us and helping us in a way to bookend the day, to help us in a way to settle, take a breath, and in a way to also offer us support and validation. So again, I'm just going to do a brief version of this. Often we would take longer, of course, to help people to build this up, but I also want to give time for all of us to be able to ask some questions. So if it's okay, pens and paper down just for a moment. We're just going to do a brief version of this. So again, you're back into that upright posture. So we have this phrase in CFT, prepare the body to support the mind. So prepare the body to support the mind. So sitting nice and upright, confident posture, allowing your shoulders just to roll back slightly so you've got this confident bit at the top of your chest. It's okay to just closing your eyes for a moment. And we're just going to reconnect, bring awareness into the here and now. Spend a moment just tuning back in to that calming breathing rhythm. Let's take a few moments just to invite a soothing or calming breathing rhythm to your body. Maybe a sense of slowing down in your body as you breathe out. If you can do, just engage with that friendly facial expression. And in this exercise, we're going to spend a few moments using imagery. Now, imagery can often be fleeting. Sometimes it can be a bit hazy. Don't worry if it's not really vivid. The point here is just with the intention to create something that's supportive. So first of all, what I would like you to do is to just hold in your own minds what qualities you would really appreciate in an ideally compassionate and caring supervisor. Think about what you need, given the difficulties you can face in day-to-day seeing of patients. What qualities would you need in an ideally compassionate supervisor? Now, whatever's popping up in your mind, I'm just going to guide you slightly too. So I'd like you just to hold in mind that this ideal caring supervisor has wisdom. So they understand that doing our jobs is hard. They understand that being a human being is hard, that we have tricky brains that get caught up in loops, and we've got difficult emotions that we often struggle to manage, and that our jobs involve having to meet suffering again and again and again. It's hard. So I'd like you to hold in mind that this image is going to be wise. They have an understanding of this. They get this. Second thing I'd like you to hold in mind is that this image of this supervisor is strong. So no matter what your distress, they'll just be there. Again, like a mountain, like a tree with deep roots, there's a strength to them, a solidity, a groundedness. But also that this image is caring. It has a real commitment to you. It wants to do whatever it can do to support you, validate you, encourage you. And so with these qualities in mind, wisdom, strength, and care and commitment, take a few moments to see if you can begin to bring to mind an image of what your ideal compassionate supervisor would look like if you could see them in front of you. So this could be a colleague or a supervisor you've had before. You might find it to mix together qualities of colleagues or supervisors that you've had before, so an amalgamation. But you might find it also helpful just to come up with an archetype, someone that you haven't met. And it doesn't have to be human. It's whatever image feels okay for you. Don't worry too much if you're finding it hard to generate an image. Just remember it's about intention here, just spending some time, just holding these ideas in mind. But for those of you who do have an image, maybe you can just notice whether this image of your compassionate supervisor is older or younger than you, male, female, or genderless. See if you can get a sense of what their facial expression is like. How would they look at you in such a way that you know they understand you? You know they will be supportive of you. See if you can imagine what the voice tone of this compassionate supervisor would sound like. How would you understand just from hearing the voice tone that they care for you? That they've got your best interests at heart? And with this image of your compassionate supervisor in front of you, just see if you can imagine now somehow kindness, care, and compassion flowing from this image towards you. And see what it's like just to be open to receiving this. What's it like for you to know that this image will always have your back? Will validate you, has empathy for what it's like to be a therapist, but also has wisdom about what might be helpful for you. And now just to finish with, see if you can bring to mind maybe a session or an end of a day recently where it has been a difficult day for you, when you have felt stressed out, when you have maybe worried about whether you're helping your clients or not. And with this stressful day in mind, I'd like you just to take a few moments now, imagining that your ideal compassionate supervisor is just there alongside you. What would this compassionate image say to you about the fact that you've had a hard day? Imagine their voice tone, the words that they would say to you, offering validation and empathy. And finally here, with this image of your compassionate supervisor in front of you, what might they advise you about shifting between your day at work and your home life? Given their care for you, their wisdom for you, what might they do then? What might they suggest to you that would be helpful to support you in moving from your day at work to being with your family, your friends, your partner, your child? What wisdom might they have about what you might need as an individual human being at the end of this day, given the type of difficult day you've had? And now we're just going to gently begin to allow this imagery to fade. You're just becoming more aware again of your soothing breathing, your upright posture in the chair. your friendly facial expression. And then when you feel ready, slowly bringing yourself back into the room and opening your eyes. So again, just take a moment just to stretch out, just move your body gently here. Now, I do recognize, everyone, that beginning to close your eyes and do these exercises after 7 o'clock in the evening isn't always the most helpful. Maybe a different type of soothing experience of feeling quite sleepy came online. But this is just one way that we can begin to think about warming down, how we can use our mind and create images to feel cared for in such a way that can be supportive and helpful for us. So with that being said then, would it be helpful, Julia, to go out just to some questions here? What's going to be the best way of doing this?
Yes, thank you very much, Chris, for that. And yes, we usually ask people to type up their questions at this point. And I've had a couple of questions already asked, so we probably can kick off with those and then wait until other questions come through.
Sure.
Anne was asking right in the beginning, compassion-focused therapy and compassion fatigue. Is there a connection?
Yes. So the first thing to say about compassion fatigue is that actually a lot of people argue that it's the wrong term. But actually it's not compassion fatigue. It's more like empathic distress. So compassion is a motive. And so the problem actually is not so much about compassion per se. It can often be about some of the other constituent parts that lead into compassion. And some of this work you'll know of, or some people know of, linked to Tanya Singer and Matthew Ricard. And so the experiment that they did, Matthew Ricard, some of you will know, has been described as the happiest man in the world because he's had his brain scanned all the time. He's a Buddhist monk and also a scientist. And anyway, for this research study, they plonked him into an fMRI scanner and asked him basically to think about distress in the world and to have empathy for that distress. So there's a lovely thing to spend your time on, just empathizing with the distress in the world. And if I remember correctly, he started trying to bring to mind the awful situation of starving Romanian orphans. So in the scanner, he was just empathizing, just imagining their suffering, just being with their suffering. And what did they notice on the brain scan? All the pain centers, the threat centers, lit up like a Christmas tree. The next role of this they did was ask him to go back into the scanner, but this time around still meditating, still connecting with the suffering of these Romanian orphans, this time asked him to bring his compassion online. And so Matthew talks about this, saying what he did here was set his compassionate intention as he would do normally, because he wouldn't normally just try and resonate empathically on its own. And actually, he talks about having to try to seep every single moment of suffering and distress of these poor children with loving kindness, with compassion. And lo and behold, what happened on the fMRI scanner, those threat pain areas in the brain were lowered. So the point is actually, when you bring a compassionate focus to this, you are still engaged with pain and distress, but actually what happens is you are attenuating down. It's a way of almost tolerating some of the awfulness, some of the pain, the threat. And so one of the things here to think about really is when we're talking about compassion fatigue, what do we really mean? And so for us in CFT, then we've got a very particular way of understanding the constituent parts of compassion, and therefore we can target which aspect of this do you need working on. Is it really compassion? Is the whole thing that's blocked? Or actually are we looking at other things that are causing you difficulties?
Thank you. Thank you. There's a quick question from Hazel, which I quite like, just the meaning of it. Why call it warming down rather than cooling down? Quite like that question.
Yeah, I mean, you could easily put that. I mean, it's a fantastic point. I guess because you've got warming in both, warming up and warming down, it kind of just flows quite nicely. But you're absolutely right. Warming up, cooling down. But I guess the thing of why it's not just necessarily cooling down is that, I don't know about you, but when I come home, it's not necessarily an easy ride either. You know, coming home to a screaming kid who doesn't want his nappy changing, and we haven't even got into feeding and bath time yet. So actually, I need to stay warm. I still need to, require to be a compassionate version of me. but it's how I move from that transition. So I'm not just dragging some of that suffering and distress. But of course, find the right language that works for you.
Yes, Zoella actually asking a question which is very much linked to what you've just said. Once you've warmed down and left your work brain at your desk, how do you resist feeling stressed, frustrated, down again when your partner asks how your day has gone?
That's a great question. One of the things here then is about wisdom. So compassion needs wisdom. And one of the things here then is for us to recognize, first of all, what do we need? So if we're blind to this, the problem is things will just play out as they play out. So if we've had a bit of a crappy day and we have done some warming down, so I feel a bit more grounded, the thing, of course, then is, well, what do I need for the rest of the evening? Now, sometimes, of course, we know it's really helpful to have our partners, our family members ask us about our days. But I think it's also fair to say that sometimes that's not what we need. Now, the point there is we don't want to leave it to chance, as in your partner or your family member asks you, how was your day? And inside you, suddenly you flare up into threat system, feeling frustrated, angry, low, like you don't want to talk about it. And then automatically you respond in a negative way to their question. The bit there, of course, is if you know something about yourself, you can predict some of this. So in the emotion regulation literature, this is sometimes talked about as situation selection. Knowing something that's about to happen or likely to happen, how do you navigate it in a wise and helpful way? So it might well be sometimes we have to let our partners know how we are. We have to give them forewarning so that we don't snap at them or we don't drag ourselves into one-word answers. You know, how was your day? All right. Okay, you know, what did you do? Normal stuff, you know, and get passive-aggressive. So letting people know what you need is part of being compassionate with yourselves. The problem is, of course, if we miss that in ourselves, if we're not good at taking our own temperature, it's very hard then to assume that the other person somehow is magically going to know what you need. And often they won't be able to do that. So your knowledge of you can inform other people about what you need. And then, of course, together you can work on this and, of course, respond in a way that's going to be helpful for you and for the other person.
Thank you. May is asking about, oh gosh, yes, it's gone up. Yes, she is asking, she or he, I don't know, asking whether you can recommend any research papers or researchers that have looked into the effectiveness of the CFT model amongst individuals with emotional eating problems, emotional eating.
Yes, so the best people to look into here, this links to the work of Ken Goss, who's in the UK. So Ken has been running an eating disorder service in Coventry for decades. And essentially it's a compassion-focused therapy program. So Ken's done amazing work over the years. If you would like to, anyone's interested in this, please send me an email. I'm very happy to send some PDF papers of some of Ken's work on eating disorders. Ken's also got a lovely book called The Compassionate Mind Approach to Overeating. So that's a really nice book, really focuses the model, helping people to use compassion-focused therapy for that. The other person to think of is Alison Kelly. So Alison's across in Canada. She's done some wonderful papers on, again, looking at CFT for a variety of different eating disorders. So again, anyone who's interested, bounce me an email. I'm very happy just to send you across some PDFs and some of the research, which is very exciting and potentially, I think, something that can make a big difference for people.
Chris, is it possible to send these PDFs to me so I could make them available to people? And also
so, yeah,
links
sure,
to your website. And people actually just ask about your latest book. Do you have it handy to show people? Or
I have it, yes, I do. Hold on a second.
That's good.
So the other day, some of you might be able to see my office. So my son came in the other day. He was just wearing his nappy and laughing. And he went across to the bookshelf and magically, I promise you, I hadn't set this up, picked out this book out of hundreds of books, which is my latest book, CFT for Difficult Emotions. He picked it up, sat on the chair, opened the book up like he was reading it. Now, I had this amazing moment. I was like, this is just the best thing. I've cracked this whole fatherhood thing. 3 seconds later, my son threw the book on the floor and started screaming. So clearly difficult emotions are problematic from various ages. and I need to help my son a little bit more. But the book's called The CFT Approach, or Compassionate Mind Approach to Working with Difficult Emotions. It's basically anyone who's interested in emotion regulation difficulties. It's a book written about that. So it's the CFT approach, how we would help people both with emotions they feel too much, that they are experiencing too often, that are too dominant, but also this idea of up-regulating absent emotions. So like some other approaches, we're not just bothered about how you help to down-regulate powerful, too intrusive emotions. How do you up-regulate certain emotions like anger, sadness, and so on, that sometimes can be blocked and people can be very fearful?
That's fantastic. It's so much linked to Paul's presentation from last week, because he was talking just about that. And people are asking to type the name of the book and so on. What I will do, as always, you will receive an email with the information from this session, and I will put the link to Chris's Amazon authors page, so you can have a link to all his books and a link to your website, Chris, if you share that with me. Yeah, sure, so everybody can find what they want. And also, I just wanted to quickly share the screen with you and talk to you about the course, which I'll share it now. And can you see it? Yeah? Can you see the page of Chris's course? Yes. So Chris is running a course for us in November. It sort of sounds a long time ahead, but it will come sooner than we think. It's in November, 12th and 13th of November, and it's always an incredibly popular course. So if you want to come and work with Chris for 2 days on compassion-focused therapy, I do suggest you book in advance, and early bird discount at the moment is in operation. So do come 12th and 13th of November, and you can book it, with us. Chris, there's a lot of fantastic feedback. People are really, really happy. And somebody said they've already completed that course and highly recommend it. Thank you very much for coming tonight.
My pleasure. I just typed into the chat room just for everyone my email address.
Yes,
so
of
please
course.
Feel free, everyone, to drop
please
me an
do.
email.
I'm sure people will be very happy.
Questions, and I'm sorry I've not been able to answer them, but if you drop me an email, I'll try my best to answer them as best as I can do. So many apologies that I took a little bit longer than I expected doing some of this, but hopefully it was helpful.
Don't worry at all. I think it was incredibly helpful. And somebody wrote a very, I think it was May as well, lovely thing, that it's fantastic to warm up and warm down with 270 people around the world. It's just a very special experience.
Right.
Yes, Chris's course will be online. We don't know what will be happening with gatherings by November, but in one way or another, it will always be broadcast online, either from the room, or we will have to think of other options with Chris. But yes, you will be able to join it online. And again, Chris, I will be very happy to share your email address in the follow-up email, which I'll send out to people. So we are meeting again next Thursday on the 25th of June. It will be an evening with Paul Grantham, and the topic will be the future of psychotherapy training. So lots of things we can discuss about where we think it's going, and also there'll be plenty of opportunity for you to complete the polls, to answer questions about future of these free Zoom sessions, which we started at the beginning of the lockdown, and psychotherapy training and all of that. So we will be really, really happy to see you on the 25th of June at 7 o'clock here. And for now, thank you very much, Chris, for joining us. I'll switch it to gallery view so I can see you all. And come again. It'll be lovely to see you again. All the best and have a good weekend. It's just around the corner. See you. Bye.
See you, everyone. Thanks for being here.
thank you for all your lovely comments. Thank you.